Everyone, and welcome to another video. So today I'm going to be reviewing the Acolyte episode 3. We just got through watching it tonight and it just came on yesterday, so you may be watching this a month out because I have other things that I'm reviewing every week on Fridays on this channel, but I am reviewing it and giving my thoughts as soon as I watch it. So let's just get right into this. So going into this episode, I heard a lot of people talking about how episode 3 was going to have this lore breaking thing to do with the Force and that it was going to destroy Star Wars forever. That's what I heard. I didn't check into the leaks because I didn't want to know. I wanted to go into it open-minded and then form my own opinion based only what I saw in the episode. So with that in mind, the entire episode was a flashback from Osha and May, like their backstory. So they were little girls when this whole thing happened. And basically they were part of this like coven of witches. They did call themselves witches. So on the one hand, it kind of like so far hasn't broken the lore or canon of the Sith. Like they're supposed to be extinct for a millennium, as Kayada Mundai says in The Phantom Menace. And technically these aren't Sith, they're witches. And so lore wise, that wasn't a big deal. And technically we do have like the Night Sisters and stuff like that in the Clone Wars. For those of you who've never seen the Clone Wars, they're a coven of witches who use the dark side to use this dark side type magic, and it's fully within the lore of Star Wars. The dark side can be used in that way, and so the Night Sisters were also in the Ahsoka show. So they're like a coven of witches similar to that, and they're all female, which is pretty typical at this point. So yeah, it's kind of like they were coven of witches who were basically banished, and this is where things get a little weird. So they have two mothers, which we had heard a line from one of the Jedi or somebody mentioning like your mothers and your sisters died or something like that. So we knew that they were going to probably have like a lesbian mother couple, which isn't like, Star Wars has never had that kind of content before. It doesn't need to. But then they started doing more like a coven type thing. And I was hoping, well, maybe they're not a lesbian couple. Maybe it's just like a nun or like a sisterhood kind of thing. And they did start calling one of them Mother, whatever her name was. And so I kind of had a lot more hope. But then they threw in one random scene where the two mothers are kind of like being more physically affectionate with one another. And it was just really brief, really subtle. So on the one hand, it wasn't in your face, but on the other hand, it wasn't necessary. It was just like a brief, like a moment where they're really close and they're about to touch and like she touches her face or something. So it was like, on the other hand, like, was that even necessary? Because they could have just done a coven of witches and they're all females, so they, you know, the younger ones call the older ones mothers. Like, that makes sense. It didn't need to be there. It was just thrown in to check a box, and it was so brief, it didn't really matter or have any significance anyway. And then things get weird. So basically the whole premise is that Osha and May, the two twin sisters, are going to go through the ascending ceremony type thing. And Osha doesn't want to, May does. And May seems to want to be part of the coven, and it seems to imply that they're like supposed to be really close because they're twins, but Osha kind of wants to have her own life apart from May and doesn't really want anything to do with her. So they get ready to do the ceremony. There's a lot of like random drama. It's pretty typical stuff. I don't remember most of it, honestly, but they go through the ceremony, and then the witches are doing this weird ritual. They're using the Force, and they call it the thread instead of the Force. And I'm starting to kind of, this is where I started to kind of not like what they were doing. It wasn't lore breaking or destroying Star Wars. It was just, to me, in my personal opinion, kind of like a bad take on the one hand. But then on the other hand, they're kind of like, it's implied that they are seen as bad by the Jedi, and it kind of implies that they use the dark side. It doesn't really say that, but one of the mothers, she says, well, the Jedi consider what we do dark, and it implies that they do use the dark side. So in movies and shows and books, you have to show the villain's perspective sometimes, and that means that the villains are going to do bad things, and they're going to think in wrong ways. So on the one hand, I don't like what they're implying with the Jedi being, you know, persecuting them or whatever. But on the other hand, these are the bad guys and they think of themselves as good, so that's what a villain would think, right? And I don't know, it's like I have to wait and see if the show is going to go for and portray it as these are the good guys and we should feel bad for them, or if they're going to like basically leave it neutral and up to the audience who you think is good and who you think is bad, or if they're going to imply the Jedi are good and these people are bad. I don't know. But then we get into the twins, and they're the black woman who you assume is their birth mother because she's black and they're black, and the other woman is a Zabrak looking thing but with elf ears, so it was kind of like weird. And it kind of like her, I love all the races. They're showing a lot of alien races, but like her race kind of stood out, kind of broke the fourth wall a bit for me because of the elf looking ears, and it was like more of a fantasy than anything that fits with Star Wars, but that's beside the point. It was kind of minor. So there's one scene where the black woman implies and tells the other woman, because the other woman, they're arguing because the Jedi show up and kind of interrupt the ascendant ceremony. So May gets ascended, but Osha does not. Osha didn't want to. And when the Jedi show up, Osha, talks to the Jedi, and the Jedi want to train her and, or at least have them tested. And so the coven agrees to let them be tested the next day. And so basically the two mothers are arguing about the fate of the twins. And the Zabrak looking woman with elf ears basically is like, I carried them. And which is weird because she's like a Zabrak looking thing. She's not the same alien race. She's white, they're black. It's just all weird. But then the black woman goes, I created them. And I'm going, huh? So before this, I was starting to get bad vibes when she mentioned that they didn't have a father. And I kind of froze, and I'm honestly torn when I watched that part, because on the one hand, it's basically doing what Anakin, like the same thing of what they did in episode 1. So on the one hand, you could see it as, okay, they're trying to just do what Star Wars does and honor and do what Star Wars did and do like an Anakin thing. On the other hand, the thing is, Anakin was one of a kind. It's not like immaculate conception happens all the time. That's an Anakin thing. And when George Lucas did it, he wasn't like twisting or mocking Christianity. He took it and kind of made a parallel with the Bible and, you know, Jesus and the Chosen One and all that stuff. And it was done in a way that kind of like respected the inspiration he was pulling from. In this case, it's not. There's twins. They're both girls. It's done completely differently. It's like a witch coven. It's all messed up, right? So on the one hand, you could say, well, they're just trying to do and honor what Star Wars did. But then on the other hand, one, from a writer standpoint, you're just doing the same thing. I mean, you're having an immaculate conception through the Force. Two kids that are chosen. You've got a witch coven, which was done through the Night Sisters. You know, it's kind of like repetitive. And then you could also see it as like Anakin was created by the Force because he was the chosen one. So what are you implying? Lore-wise, it doesn't make any sense for that to happen more than once, especially since this is a couple hundred years before that. So for it to happen twice in the same galaxy is really a far stretch, but I could see it if you set this like thousands upon thousands of years ago. So like Anakin was the chosen one for this era, but like thousands of years before that, there was another one, maybe. But this is just like 100 years before episode 3. So it's only 75 before episode 1. And Anakin's 10 in there. So technically this is 60 years before Anakin. This is just a regular human lifespan before Anakin was born. So for the Force to create, you know, the twins. And so all this is going through my head when she mentions that they had no father. I just don't know whether to hate it or be neutral about it. But then fast forward back to the scene where they're arguing, and the Zabrak elf woman is like, I carried them, which again is weird because they're black and human and she's white and some sort of alien race, whatever. And then the black woman goes, I created them. And so then I'm like, well, what does that mean? And I'm not kidding, that's all that they explain. Like, she could have used technology to like impregnate the other woman, maybe. She could have used the Force and the dark side, which is not lore breaking. Like, we know that is possible with the dark side, and that's why it's like evil, because you're using the dark side to do things that you shouldn't be doing. Like, Plagueis knew how to create life and save life in the dark side. We know this. Palpatine tells Anakin this with all the lore in episode 3, and when Palpatine goes, he knew he could use the, how did he say that? Palpatine goes, he can use the midichlorians to create life, and he looks at Anakin, and the look he gives him kind of implies, well, Plagueis might have done it. So it was either Plagueis or the Force that created Anakin. We don't know that for sure. We don't know which one for sure, but it was either one of those two things that created Anakin. So it is possible with the dark side to create life. However, it was a secret dark side ability that Plagueis learned, knew, and studied himself, and Palpatine learned it from Plagueis. So why would a random coven of witches that use the Force, that they don't even call the Force, that don't even use it in the way that Sith do, so they're not as powerful, they don't come off as powerful that way, at least to me, why would she, the leader of this witch coven, randomly know how to do this? Because if this is 60 years before episode 1, so 60 years before Anakin was born, Plagueis would be alive during this time. So she somehow is connected with Plagueis and knows, learned it from Plagueis, which I could see and be down for. 2, she knows it apart from Plagueis, which could break canon and lore. And yeah, all the legend stuff about, all the lore about Plagueis and all that stuff, most of it comes from a novel that isn't technically canon, but it's the fans have loved it and known it and learned it for years. So you're gonna break a lot of fans' hearts if you go against that. So she could have used the Force on her own, which again is weird, and I don't think it should be a thing, but depends on how they handle it. 3, she could have used some science to impregnate the woman, and then lied about it to the coven, because she did call it a miracle, that the twins were a miracle and that they were banished, and so that their coven was banished, so it's like a miracle that the twins were born. So she could have chalked it up to a miracle even though it wasn't. 4, they could try to do a lesbian thing where somehow they were able to get each other pregnant, when that's not how that works. That's not how biology works. And if they did that, it would be wrong. You're going against reality and biology for the sake of inserting a woke agenda that doesn't belong in Star Wars. It doesn't do anything for the story, because the idea of immaculate conception is not new, and it was an Anakin and Anakin only thing, and so you shouldn't be doing it now. It's not necessary to the twins. It's not necessary to their character, their arcs, or their stories. They could be special. There's other things that you could do for it. So I don't know. For me, one, it's very vague. Nothing was really specific in this episode. So on the one hand, it was kind of creative, but then every idea that they used was kind of repetitive because it's been done before. So there's really nothing that stands out as, oh, that's so new. Star Wars needed this. It's just kind of average ideas. You're copying from ideas that have been done in Star Wars before, but they've been done so much better than what you're doing now. And then it's the whole woke politics, mothers, lesbian mothers who love each other. It wasn't necessarily they had one scene where they were really affectionate with each other, and you could have taken that out. It did not add anything to the story at all. And so yes, it wasn't in your face, which is good, because I'd rather it not be in my face or shoved down my throat. But at the same time, it's why did you need to throw that? Because it's it was one scene that easily could have been cut out. You didn't need that. And then the one thing that I do, so those are all the things that I'm confused about and not sure how to feel about. And then the one thing that I did actually hate was implying that the Jedi are bad. We're starting, and we knew that that's what they were going to do. The showrunners and everybody warned us about it. And so they come here to try to test the girls, and I did appreciate that they at least asked for permission. So Osha wants to be a Jedi, but if she grew up in a coven that hates Jedi, where did she learn about the Jedi? How did she know about the Jedi? How did she know about their symbol that she drew in her little notebook? I have questions. Why did she want to be a Jedi? How did she know that the Jedi are good if all she's learned is that they're not good? So I had a lot, it was the writers and authors, like as an author, I can see when it's what I call writer convenience, which is when something happens or a character does something just because the writer wants them to. It's called writer convenience, and if you don't have good reasons why something happens or somebody does something, then it's writer convenience, and it's happening or it's being done because you want it to. And that's why Osha wanted to be good and wanted to be a Jedi, and that the Jedi were good. There's no logical reason why she would think that or believe that, knowing the coven that she grew up in. But then it's like, it's just the way that they're portrayed as like, they persecuted us, poor us, we're a minority people that have been persecuted, and now they're here to try to stop us from this thing. And it has a very woke underlying like plot to it that's really obvious and kind of like takes me out of the story. And then it didn't answer any questions. We were waiting for this flashback to find out what happens, and it kind of shows that May lights Osha's like journal on fire, and so that somehow lit this metal and stone compound on fire and spread. But then everybody, all of the witches that were dead were just laying on the ground, and they weren't killed by the fire or the smoke, and they all randomly died in a pile. So it implies that like May set the fire, but I think what they're gonna do, and I haven't seen, like the next episode's not out yet, so I'm predicting it here, that the Jedi killed the witches because the witches were supposed to convene and talk about whether they were gonna let Osha go with the Jedi or not. And so what I think happened is that they met, decided no, Jedi came to ask, the witches said no, the Jedi get mad, they killed the witches, May set the fire, and they used it to cover it up, and then implied May was a bad guy, and that's why she's getting revenge now. I can pretty much call it. And so the Jedi are bad, and that's why the one Jedi guy was so guilty he killed himself. And it's just like, I don't like the way they're portraying the Jedi, and it also doesn't really make sense because this is like 70 to 100 years. This is 70 years before episode 1. And so yeah, the Jedi are a little bit cold-hearted and callous sometimes, and they're a little bit more political than they should be in the prequels. But like these Jedi don't fit and make sense with prequel Jedi. And I've heard from other people who read the High Republic books, which is before this, that they don't fit the High Republic Jedi either. So I'm like, it doesn't really fit. And it still gives me this weird Star Wars fan fiction vibe when I watch it, and it doesn't feel like Star Wars. And in the last 2 episodes in my reviews, I'll pop them here on the screen, I mentioned I couldn't figure out why it feels off. And yesterday we watched another episode of The Bad Batch, and I was telling my sister, I think part of what could be off is like the dialogue, the way that they talk, the way that they put words together, the word choices that they use doesn't feel like Star Wars to me. There's a lot more than just that, but I think that's part of it. The music feels like Star Wars to me. So music wise, it really does feel like Star Wars, but everything else just feels off, and it feels like it's just missing something that, like the Bad Batch for me, I really don't care about it, but it still feels like Star Wars. So to me, it's like you have the Acolyte and you have the Bad Batch, and for me it's like the ratings are actually pretty close to each other. They're both about an average 3-star show, and yet the Bad Batch is on a whole nother level than the Acolyte, because Bad Batch at least feels like Star Wars to me, whereas the Acolyte doesn't. And it's just very weird, and I don't know what it is. I know the dialogue may be part of it, but it doesn't feel like, it doesn't have that Star Wars feeling to me that you'd watch when you watch the originals, the prequels, or even like Star Wars Rebels, the Clone Wars, the Bad Batch, you know, all these other Star Wars shows, and it just doesn't feel the same to me, and I don't know why. So basically this episode was very vague, repetitive ideas done to try to be creative, but actually wasn't as creative as people thought it was, as the creators probably thought it was, and it didn't answer any questions. It left more questions, and there's things that could potentially break the lore if you're not careful. And so for me, it's definitely 3 stars. I was gonna give it 2.5, but it tries to be creative, and so I gotta give it at least half a star, like at least half for that. So that's why it's 3 stars instead of 2.5 stars, because it's trying, but it just didn't I don't know. I didn't like it as much as the first two, and I don't know how to feel about certain things. And if they take the lore in a certain direction, it could break canon. It hasn't broken canon yet, so I don't know. I do feel like, on the one hand, to be fair, I do feel like the people who are critiquing it and saying this is gonna break Star Wars, that's over exaggerated. So I feel like the haters, the Disney Star Wars haters, which I could be included in that category, but I feel like some of them are jumping the gun and being overly critical. I don't think it's like breaking canon yet, but I think it depends on where they go with this. And if they portray the witch covens and their beliefs as a bad thing, and do imply that the Jedi are maybe a little like mistaken sometimes, but not evil, then it could fix things. But if they take it as, oh, the witches were in the right, the Jedi were in the wrong, the witches are poor, oppressed people, and the Jedi are like, you know what I mean? Like, if they, and then it depends on what they do and how they explain the Immaculate Conception through the Force or whatever, and the mom. So it kind of depends on what they do with it for me, on whether I'm going to hate it or be okay with it. And I just can't help but see the woke stuff. I don't know how else to explain it, but I can't help but see the woke crap, the woke parallels that they're throwing in our faces, because the Jedi you could easily see how they're trying to parallel the Jedi with a overbearing police force that's oppressing anybody who doesn't believe like they do, and this poor oppressed minority group that's been oppressed by the police of the galaxy. And it's a load of bull malarkey that is not true in society today, that they're trying to shove down our throats. And it's like, just come on. I want good fantasy fictional content, like sci-fi, not fantasy, but you know what I mean, like fictional content. We watch this stuff to escape reality, not to be thrown back in it. And that's not to say that the originals didn't have their parallels, that the prequels didn't have their parallels. George Lucas did have like political messaging in his stuff, but it was not obvious. You have to really look deep to find that kind of stuff. And it wasn't trying to like tell you how to believe. It was like it was just kind of like an underlying tone that is there if you look for it, and if not, you can still just escape into this world and enjoy it. So overall, 3.5, or I didn't say 3.5, 3 stars for me. I have a lot of questions. This episode didn't do a whole lot for me, and it left more questions than answers, which on surface level is normally a good thing, unless they're bad questions with worries about breaking canon. And I don't know how to feel about it. So what are you guys thinking? Like, let me know in the comments below. Do you like it? Do you not like it? What are your thoughts and theories about this whole Immaculate Conception with these witches and stuff? Like, let me know all of your guys' thoughts in the comments below, because I really don't know how to feel, honestly. Like, I don't know. I really don't know. Yeah, but anyways, if you liked this video, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more writing and reading videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if you liked my review of the Acolyte episode 3, then check here. I'll have my review of episode 4 out. Who knows what they're going to do next, guys? You got to check it out and watch it to get all of my opinions and the details in the video.